master's degree is in political science and nonverbal communication. I had teachers at the high school that were afraid of me because they said I was watching them all the time, because I used to get to fights before they broke out, and the two combatants were staring at each other, and I would get between them, and I'd say, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And they go, "Oh, Mr. Bolin, you're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And then one time, I was in my office, or my classroom, and I didn't come out, and the coaches broke the fight up, and they came in after they split up the combatants, and they came into my classroom, and they said, "Why weren't you, you're out there all the time, why weren't you out this time?" And I said, "Because my mother didn't raise a fool. I heard the chains, and I heard the metal clinging." They were, two gangs were combating, and I heard in their pants. I saw the wide pants, I heard the noise, and I knew they were breaking out chains and metal bars. And I'm not going out there for that. And so I taught, I don't anymore, but I taught teachers how to read people in nonverbal communication. Next slide. Next one? Okay. What is it and how do you read people? If you are planning and wanting to have a ministry within your workplace, you really need to know how to read people. Because what it will do, one, it will allow you to minister more effectively, but two, it will keep you out of trouble. Next one. And just go ahead and go down the line. So, what do you see when you go to work? Do you see people who are you barely know? Do you see people that are approachable and uninterested in things of God? Do you see people doing their jobs? Sometimes you'll see people who don't do their jobs, but they're good at hiding it. How about people with relationships, moods, and situations? I love that, what is it, that cam the other day where the two people were found that shouldn't have been together? Yeah. Anybody with any sense of nonverbal could have figured that out at the office. They didn't have to wait for the cam to show up with the two of them in an embracing situation. How about people who are sick, sad, happy, or experiencing pain? People who lost a family member or are content with life. People who need a friend, people who are picked on because they are different, or people who are lonely. Can you read them? Do you know how to read them? That's what we'll be doing as we go through this nonverbal communication. Next slide. God confused language at Babel, and from that point on, 80% of what we communicate is nonverbal. And I will say over and over again, the media has ruined us because we text people and we don't send the nonverbal with it. And it's almost guaranteed they're going to miss what we say. We will end up having to seek forgiveness. Well, I didn't mean it that way. Well, you shouldn't have sent it. because 80% of what we say, how we communicate, is through the nonverbal. And God hates 7 things. 4 of them are nonverbal. Arrogant eyes, that's facial expressions. You know what I'm talking about, when somebody gives you that look. They don't have to say anything. I love it when I talk to parents and I say, just think about your child and when they give you that look. I used to say that to mine. Don't you look at me like that. Hands that shed innocent blood. And this is, if you go back into the original language, it's actions without words. People are setting up situations for evil. It's not that they're saying anything, it's they're setting up evil. Hearts that devise wicked schemes. This is body language that's expressing a motive. What is that old saying? If looks could kill? Well, I didn't do anything. Yeah, but you sure had it in your heart, didn't you? And God views the last 3. Next one. A lying tongue. We're going to talk about, I got a whole section on that one here in a little bit. A false witness that pours out lies, and a man that stirs up dissension among the brothers. And what he's talking about here is among believers. And this one deals strongly with churches. I was in a church that had broken off from another church back in the 20s, but never realized that what they needed to do was to seek reconciliation from the church staff and the deacons for that division. And there, as I talked to the staff and to the deacon body itself, I told them that they were having a problem because of that. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh, that's in the past." True, but it may be our history, but it needs to be addressed. And when I deal with individuals who have issues, I let them know that they need to make peace with their past. You're not going to have an effective ministry, and you're not going to have an effective life unless you have made peace with your past. And so we need to understand that. All right, the importance of nonverbal. When the unintended nonverbal conflicts with what is said, it can undermine what we intend to say in our verbal written message. And that's where this media issue comes into play. We send the message, and it's out there. And there is no way to bring it back. You can try to delete it, but it's still out there. And it may come back to haunt you for years. Right now I'm thinking of this guy that's running for mayor in New York. He has said things years past, and he says, "Well, it's at a moment of anger or whatever it is." No, going back to values and beliefs. No, that's what you meant, and that's what you said. And now you're changing your mind because you want to win an election. And when I start a political science class, I look at my students and I say, do you know how you can tell if a politician is lying? And they stare back at me. I said, their lips are moving. Yeah, and we'll go into a story later on that relates to that. A nonverbal message has meaning only in the context of the original conversation. So you can send the message out on your phone or your iPad or whatever, and then get with the person later on and say, well, what I meant, and they can see your nonverbals, but the damage has already been done. So you really need to be careful. There's always a danger of misunderstanding that which is not said. Enter the age of social media, Facebook, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Facial expressions are most important to both the listener and the speaker. Note the next slide. I love these. Number one, that first one to the left. This individual, the guy, got caught. He is now front and center saying, I didn't mean what I did. And so he's showing his repentance dance. You know, when your head is down, you know, and, oh, I'm guilty. I didn't mean to do that. But look at the one behind him. She is gloating. You got caught. And I can't go into any more than that, but yeah, she's gloating. And she's hoping at this point, she's hoping it becomes far worse for him than he ever imagined. Studying that particular part of history, he has a history of that kind of conduct. And she knew it. And she's ready for him to pay his penance. Now, the little boy in the center didn't get his way. I don't have to say a word. I could be sitting across the room and know that just by his stance, his position. And then the couple to the far right, they have been in love for years. And they are just having time of their life. I saw that a couple of years ago when I got it. I never thought I would end up with one of those fancy little toys. You know, when people first saw me with my cane, they looked at me going, "What is this?" I said, "Oh, isn't it neat? Man of my age, they allow you these little toys." You know, and I said, one, to kind of help you stabilize, but I said, two, it's a great weapon. You know. And I hit my son with it, and he goes, "Dad, don't make me take that away from you." All right, next one is hand gestures. Oh, I love this. When I was in the service, I got sent to Athens, Greece. I love that. I volunteered for Vietnam. I joined the Air Force to get out of Vietnam. Became an air traffic controller and cross-trained as a combat forward controller. Not the airplane, all right? What they would do is they'd drop me into hot spots, and I'd call in airstrikes. And I volunteered because my brother was supposed to be going. And he had just got married. Got married in November, got his orders in December. And I thought, they can't do that. And so I volunteered. And my commanding officer looked at me and he goes, "You are either the craziest person I ever met or you're the dumbest." He said, "Airman, what do you do when they drop you into these, quote, hot spots?" I said, "Well, sir, I push my gear out the back of the C-130 and then I go out and grab my gear and call in the strikes. You know, the F-4s come over and drop bombs. And they did, in practice. And so he said, do you realize what you are? And then he shouts at me. This is like a father figure to me. He stands up, beats on the desk, and he says, you are the target. Never thought about that. He says, I am so proud to sign this for you, and I wish you well. He said, your lifespan over in Nam is 10 days, 2 weeks. Okay. 9 months later, I meet my wife. Didn't know that she was going to be my wife. 2 weeks later, I get orders. My first sergeant calls me and he said, okay, Johnny, we're sending you out of here. I said, okay, where in Nam am I going? He said, you're not going to Nam. Where am I going? He said, Athens, Greece. I ran to get the orders, ran back to my commanding officer, showed it to him, and he looks, he goes, who do you know? None of us are going that direction. When I finally did get to Greece, I got a Twix, and a friend of mine in the unit said, he goes, you left 5 days before your orders would have been canceled because we're all heading to Nam. God didn't want me there. But in retrospect, when I was going to Athens, I got culture studies. One of the things we found was that there are certain things in the culture, hand gestures, that you had to be wary of. You never wave to people with your left hand. Now, we're being taped, so I have to be careful on this because it may get out into the Middle East. But yeah, the left hand is not, it's used for personal things. You got to remember going all the way back to pre-TP days. That's what it was used for. Saddam Hussein, when he wanted to really hurt his enemies, his political enemies, he cut off their left hand. So they had to use the right hand for everything. So you never wave with your left hand. But you also don't wave with the right hand in the front. So I'm turning this way. You don't do this. Because in that culture, it's the 5 evils. You wave in the back. Do you ever notice why Italian popes always waved like this? It's because they wouldn't show the front of their hand because of that culture. Friends and I were driving down the Kingsway in Athens, and somebody passed us up, and I'm sitting in the shotgun, and as we passed the guy up, the guy says, okay, show him your hand. And I said, what? He said, yeah, so, I did this. You could see the guy just explode with anger. And he passes us up and does the same thing. And so we pass him up. I show him 2 fingers, and we go back and forth until there's 5 fingers. We're in hysterics in here. He finally realizes we're joking. But in his culture, we had made him mad, and we had insulted him. Another thing, hugging. If you go over the Middle East, people are going to hug you. Men, be aware of that. It's not anything other than they like you. And we were warned. And my landlord, it was horrible over in Greece. I worked at the international airport, and I lived off the economy, and I was 21 years old. I had a 5-room house and a maid. I don't know how I survived. But I needed glasses. My landlord met me downtown to help to go to a glass place, optometrist, and he was going to translate for me. He didn't speak English, but he was going to help me get glasses. And so when I got off the bus, John hugs me, and then puts his arm around me and walks me to the optometrist, and I'm doing this number. I knew that was a cultural thing. And then he walks in, and in his broken, half English, mostly Greek, he introduces me as his best buddy, and he's got his arm around him. The guy from the counter comes along, gives me another hug, and a kiss on the cheek. And by this time, I'm just, okay, we're done. But again, gestures are important. And if you watch people, particularly high schoolers, they're funnier than anything. If they get upset with each other, talk to the hand. But again, you just have to watch people. Next one is gait or walk. Now, obviously, my walk has changed a little bit because of the cane, but it's a matter of walking, stepping, bearing, and carrying oneself. You can tell a lot about people. Are they in a hurry? Are they not in a hurry? Our job as teachers was to stand out in the hall and watch students. And I had to teach teachers how to recognize the problems in the school. And so in the hall, students would be walking around, it'd just be a normal level of noise. But when a fight was about to break out, all of a sudden, everybody's going to the fight, wherever the location was. And I'd just start following the students. But I'd go faster to try and get to wherever it is the fight was going to break out. And it's just about their gait and then the noise level. Next one is body posture. What do you see here? This is called a posture of seniority. Hers, she's upset, but she's submitting. Apparently, she did something to make him mad. And he's not taking kindly to it. But she does not want to yield. If she was really submissive, her hands would be down. But this shows me, through her face, she's really annoyed. All right, you keep talking. Once you're through, I'm going. I'm out of here. On my master's degree, I was also traveling back and forth to Austin, to the state capitol. And I got through the meetings early, so I ended up sitting in the airport. Just back in the old days, you can do that. And so I'm sitting there taking notes because of my class. All of a sudden, I realized that there's a TSA guy standing next to me, and he's going, "Sir, what are you doing?" And so I explained to him that I was doing a paper on nonverbals, and he sat down next to me, and I showed him my notes. And so we started taking 10-cent bets on people. Those two people together, is this guy going to turn here? Is he going to go there? And we were there probably about 45 minutes before I had to get on the plane. And he stops me. As I get up, he grabs me and he says, "Can you come back and teach us this?" He says, this is more than I knew before. And I told him, I said, "Yeah, you wasting your time going through bags and all this." I said, "All you got to do is watch people. You can tell who's going to be bad just by watching them." And so he never called me back. But next one is sitting. One of the things we ended up having to do in the graduate course is go to a corporate office meeting and sit there as an observer and watch who's talking and how they're talking. All right? So cross arms over the chest. I don't see anybody there. Fidgeting and doodling and foot swinging and cross legs. Leaning forward, tilted toward one another. All right? open, engaged position, leaning into the conversation. Having both feet on the ground. I don't see any of that. Looking directly. Well, that one lady's looking directly at the guy with the computer. Obviously, that's the guy who's in charge of the meeting. One lady's taking notes. Now, the question would be, you have to know all this beforehand or afterwards. You know, is she the secretary? Secretaries are in charge. Let me tell you this much. They've got more power than anybody else because they are the gatekeepers, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. You know, but this one guy's got his legs crossed in the feminine position. You know, men cross their legs this way, not that way. That's just an understood. Don't know about this one guy who's back to us. But again, as you watch people, how they sit, you can tell, one, are they hurt? Are they in pain? Is there an issue? And it gives you an opportunity to do ministry. Because you can say, are you okay? Is there an issue? Is something I can do? Next one is distance. It depends on the culture, the relationship, the friendship, disputes, young people, and Twitter patient. I told that to high school students, and they looked at me crossways. I said, yeah, when you fall in love. I knew which ones were having relationships and who weren't and how they broke up. All you had to do was watch. In this situation, you know, you've got people, possibly friends or family. COVID, I couldn't get away from those COVID pictures. Who in their, and if you do that or did this, I apologize. But who in their right mind wears a mask in their own car? I mean, really. You know, who are you catching a cold from? I have to go to a gym. Well, I do now because they got me in the habit. But I go to a gym and there are signs all over the place is wipe off the equipment before and after use. And I looked at the manager and I said, seriously? I said, what kind of nonsense is this? They said, this is a hospital. We have to keep it clean. And so when I grab those little wipey things, I go, hello. You know, and I might wipe one thing just to make people feel good about but it's ridiculous. I grew up in New Jersey, and my cousins lived in Queens, New York. We swam in the East River. I am immune to everything. We used to use the trash barges as diving boards. There's nothing that's going to get me. I haven't had a flu shot since I got out of the service. So, there. But anyway, again, the guys in the bottom right-hand corner, I mean, they're just, again, it depends on the level of your friendship. And a lot of times we mistake that. You know, I have young men that I disciple, and we hug when we get together. My son is I'm a hugger. My family is huggers. And so, and like I said, if you go to the Middle East, expect to get hugged if they know you, particularly if you go on a mission trip. All right, next one. Time. Time depends on the culture. We are Americans. We get there on time. The rest of the world doesn't. I call it time-ish. When I first went to Mexico and brought my students when I was a youth minister, we'd get there, we'd set up the Jesus film, and we got there at a certain time, and we were the ones who were there. And the kids would look at me and go, should we start the film? I said, for who? And everybody else would show up over the hour. And then one night we were doing it, and a storm was coming in, and when about the time halfway through the video, I looked around, and we were the only ones in the church because everybody else headed home because of the storm coming, because they walked there. And so when I go to Eastern Europe, that's the very same thing. And so when I talk to the people setting up meetings, I say, are we talking ish? And they go, yep. And so I get there, well, not right on the clock, I get right after it. But you need to understand that. And some people are fashionably late in America. We had a couple, their daughters were in my youth group, and they were constantly late, an hour. And so what I did was I always set the notices an hour early, and I would warn all the other families. And they were still late. But everybody else had been there an hour before. Go figure. Next one. Objects, materials, things, equipment, communicates relationships, and colors. The color of your house, the color of your room. Certain things, you don't want to paint children's rooms bright colors. You don't want to paint children's rooms that have special needs bright colors, because it triggers. You want to find out. I had a blessed opportunity to have a running relationship with students with dyslexia and other diseases. And I asked a student one day who was walking down the hall, he had yellow glasses on. I thought they were sunglasses. And I said, what's the deal in the building? And he said, these are my glasses. I can read with these. And so I started to research it, and I found out that violet, gray, blue, yellow, red are colors that dyslexics prefer. And for some reason, it puts the letters together. And when I became principal of a private Christian school, a lot of the parents were pulling their kids out of the public school to come to our school because I was there. And as soon as the kids came in, the parents say, well, we've been in public school and no one was doing anything. And I'd get the kids to read something, and I'd start throwing color scans underneath their eyes as they were doing it. And once in a while, what'd you just do? That's your color. I had a police officer who was dyslexic all his life. He never knew he had a color. And he and I were talking over lunch, and he was trying to read the menu, and I threw a color in front of him. Just lucky guess. And he ended up going to the optometrist and getting it colored, his glasses colored. And he, from that point on, he had no issues. So color is important. It also dictates what your nonverbal signs are. Building, office furniture, workspace arrangements, nonverbal messages of status, power, and prestige. It's amazing. Objects also, the next slide, means success. It talks about certain house, certain building address, gatekeepers, number of secretaries. Did you ever try to get into the president's office or the principal's office? You got to go through at least 2 secretaries. When I was business manager of a college, you had to go through 2 people. And you were lucky if you got through them. In one city that I was at, I had a whole herd of gatekeepers, and everybody walked past me. I knew who was coming in, and when they get in, and the secretary came into my office and told me who was there. Well, I already knew because they walked past my smoke-covered window, and if I didn't want to talk to them, I went out that door. And she had to go back out and say, no, he just left. She wasn't lying. I just didn't want to talk to that particular person. But wallpaper, the office size. Is your office paper, plastic, brick, or paint? The president of the college that I worked for had two offices. He had his inner office and his outer office, his formal office. And so when I went and he and I talked, we were in his inner office, and very few people got in there. But if a group came or someone formal, he went into the outer office, closed that door, and they met out there. And it had wallpaper, fancy wallpaper. And it had a huge desk. It was a huge room. He had a couch there, a very uncomfortable couch, because he didn't want people to stay. Smart man. But it took two secretaries to get to him. And again, it's status. And then the question is, house. Where do you live? Is it a status area or not? Think about that. And then the size of your office. As a teacher, I had a desk in the corner of the classroom. As a college university professor, I actually had an office. And you had to get past a secretary. As a city manager, you had to get through two women who collected bills, then my secretary to get to me. And it was around the corner for the most part. And it was just status. Next slide. There are biblical objects. The tabernacle was an object. The bronze snake was an object. The pillar of cloud by day and fire by night was an object. A man made idols. Man-made idols. Why did God get so upset over that? Because what happens is your focus gets off of God and gets on these things that you think do something. As a Catholic growing up, I learned about all these statues and the power that you prayed to that statue that was representing somebody who has as much power as Jesus. In Carthage, Texas, a man made a statue, small statue, of footprints in the sand. And they ended up making a 10-foot tall statue of it. Who funded it? An atheist. We discovered. When he died, his family got upset and withdrew the funding. And so they took off his head and put the head of the mayor on it because, well, we can't have an atheist on our statue. But 3 major Southern Baptist churches gave $25,000 each to seed money to fund the statue. They wouldn't give it to our rescue mission, but they would give it to the statue. And the town is now suffering, in my opinion, because of that. Now, that's my opinion. They think that everything's great. And I told them, I said, people are going to be praying to the statue. And they said, no. And I got wind of some lady who had cancer, or her daughter had cancer, and they met at the statue to pray to God. Pray to Jesus that her daughter would be saved. Had a prayer meeting. And now they have a meeting tabernacle or something right there too. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous. Tree of knowledge of good and evil and circumcision. That's an object. When you read through, particularly when Christianity started and Paul was arguing with the Jews over that. Next one. Tones. Quiet voice or loud voice. When I taught teachers, I told them, I said, never yell at your students. English teachers obviously didn't pay attention to me because they shouted. I could hear them across the way. And they'd look at me in the meetings and they'd say, I have to. My students are loud. I said, yeah, once in a while my students are too. And I said, I just lean on a podium and say, thank you very much. You can stop now. I had a favorite expression that got their attention. I can't say it in church. It wasn't nasty. It was just, something. But they all go, what? I said, all right, now that I have your attention. And they listened. And I never raised my voice. If I had a student who was talking in the back, I would walk to the back. I lectured walking around the room. And so I would just stand next to their desk and tap my fingers on their desk while I was lecturing. And if I knew them well, now John was never one of those, so I'm going to make that clear. All right? But if I knew them well, I would slap them in the back of the head if I knew their family, and I knew a lot of them. If they were one of my youth in my church, they were mine, but I didn't have any trouble with them. I had one young man who was dyslexic and had ADD. He was failing most of his classes, or failing a lot of his classes. And so when he came into my classroom my first day, I set him right up front, and I told him, I said, okay, when I start teaching, put your head down. And he grinned at me and he goes, excuse me? I said, no, you're auditory. You're not visual. I said, what's going to happen is while I'm talking, you're going to be looking around the room. Put your head down. Okay, I can do that. I said, and don't go to sleep. He goes, oh, all right. And so the kids, he was well known in school, kids picked on him, said, oh, he's asleep. I said, no, he's not. Are you? He goes, no, sir. Immediately answered me. He failed most of his test. So what did I do? I gave him a verbal test. Why? Because he was a verbal listener. He knew every answer. I answered him the test for him while he gave me the answers. I learned what kind of learning style every student had. He is now, I love this story, he is now a master air conditioner man and a master firefighter. Now, he had to take a written test for both levels. They would not give him any kind of side thing or verbal thing. He had to take the written side. But we taught him how to do that, how to fight that instinct. But he did. He passed them. And I'm so proud of him. I performed his wedding, and he was a neat kid. But anxious voice, yelling, screaming, whistling, snapping fingers, everything gives an indication of a emotion and an indication of what they need, what their needs are. I came from a house where my parents yelled and cursed at each other. My mother had a real bad experience in marriage. What I didn't find out till I was 34 that they had never married, but she was married to another man and never divorced. And long story short, my brother and I, were not what we thought we were. And so they cussed at each other. My mother at one time hit my dad with a cast iron pot. I thought she had killed him. And so, I mean, they screamed at us. We screamed back at them. My brother and I fought fisticuffs. We don't have much of a relationship now. But that's just the way we grew up. And when I got married, I didn't want any of that. I told my kids, I don't want you fighting. I don't want you yelling at each other. They were fighting over a toy one day, and I took them out I grabbed the toy, took it out to the garage. I said, whose toy is this? Why are we fighting? And I took a baseball bat and broke it into pieces. I said, now fight over it. And I went back in the house and left 2 screaming kids. And my wife said, thank you very much. I said, they know if they fight over something again, I will take care of it. They never fought over anything again. But I don't yell. I didn't yell in the classroom, but I had control. And I have control from the clothes I wear. I always wore a suit and a tie. And I had other teachers who came dressed like students. And they looked at me and they said, how come I can't control my classroom, but you never have a problem? I said, because I dress the part. I'm in control. And they know that. And it's nothing more than nonverbal communication.